The image of Michael Jordan often feels untouchable: 6 championships, 5 MVP awards, and a competitive fire that redefined what greatness means in basketball. But behind the soaring dunks and championship parades lies another story. For Jordan, winning was never enough. He needed to conquer, to punish, and to never forget those who crossed him. And in that relentless pursuit, certain rivals became more than just opponents. They became scars etched into his memory. From the moment he entered the league in 1984, Jordan was tested. Veterans tried to humble him, bruisers tried to break him, and entire dynasties stood in his way. But rather than fade, every slight, every hard foul, every insult became fuel. Jordan didn't just play against his rivals, he carried them with him, turning bitterness into fire that drove him to the top. There was Larry Bird, whose Celtics taught him the cruelty of playoff basketball. There was Isiah Thomas, whose bad boys Pistons beat him down year after year, mocking his pain and forcing him to evolve. Bill Laimbeer, the face of that Detroit brutality, seemed to take pleasure in punishing Jordan every time he drove to the rim. Then came Karl Malone, a powerhouse who stood in the way of Jordan's second three-peat, making every finals possession a battle of wills. And Clyde Drexler, the smooth star of Portland, became the subject of endless comparisons until Jordan crushed the debate in 1992 with a performance that silenced all doubt. These were not passing quarrels. They were rivalries that defined Jordan's career, shaping both his triumphs and his fury. They reveal a truth often hidden beneath the highlight reels, that Michael Jordan's path to greatness was paved not only by his talent, but by the grudges he carried, the enemies he refused to forgive. So who were the 5 men that lit the fire inside the greatest to ever play? Let's return to the golden age of basketball and uncover the rivals Michael Jordan could never quite forgive. When Michael Jordan first entered the NBA in 1984, the Boston Celtics were the gold standard of excellence. At the heart of their dominance was Larry Bird, a 3-time champion, 3-time MVP, and the ultimate competitor. For the young Jordan, Bird was more than a rival, he was a mountain that had to be climbed, and for years, that mountain refused to budge. The clash between Jordan and Bird reached its first unforgettable moment in the 1986 playoffs. Jordan, only in his second season, walked into the Boston Garden with a broken foot that had limited him most of the year. Few expected the Bulls to challenge the mighty Celtics, yet Jordan delivered one of the most jaw-dropping performances in history, scoring over 60 points in Game 2. The crowd was stunned, and even Bird admitted afterward that it wasn't a human they had just faced, but God disguised as Michael Jordan. Still, as remarkable as it was, Boston won the series in a sweep. For Jordan, the pain was sharp. He had shown brilliance, but Bird and his Celtics had proven that talent alone wasn't enough to conquer a dynasty. The Celtics continued to be a thorn in Jordan's side through the late 80s. Their disciplined defense, veteran savvy, and Bird's cold-blooded shooting denied him any chance of advancement. Every spring, Jordan's dreams ended at the hands of Boston, and each loss fueled the fire inside him. To Michael, Bird symbolized the league's pecking order, the old guard that dismissed challengers until they were truly ready to take the throne. Even as Jordan grew stronger, adding muscle and sharpening his game, memories of those early defeats lingered. Respect was there. Jordan often praised Bird's brilliance, but so was bitterness. Bird represented the barrier that made Jordan's rise more painful, the constant reminder that greatness required more than highlights, it demanded sacrifice and scars. By the time Jordan's Bulls finally rose to power in the 90s, Bird's Celtics were fading. Yet the sting of those battles never left. For Michael Jordan, Larry Bird was the rival who first humbled him, who forced him to transform from a spectacular scorer into a relentless champion. And though respect eventually eclipsed resentment, those early wounds remained a part of Jordan's legend, a reminder that every king must first be broken before he can rule. Few rivalries in NBA history carried the bitterness of Michael Jordan versus Isiah Thomas. Unlike Larry Bird, who humbled Jordan with dominance, Isiah seemed to cut deeper, because their battles were drenched not only in competition but also in personal animosity. The Detroit Pistons of the late 80s, known as the Bad Boys, built their identity on punishing defense and intimidation. At the center of it all stood Isiah Thomas, the floor general who led with cunning, toughness, and a willingness to blur the lines of sportsmanship. For Jordan, who was trying to elevate the Bulls into contenders, the Pistons became the immovable obstacle. Year after year, Detroit stood in his path, and it was Isiah who smiled as Chicago's dreams collapsed. The Pistons devised the infamous Jordan rules, a defensive scheme designed to knock Jordan off balance, physically and mentally. Every drive to the basket was met with bodies, hard fouls, and relentless traps. For 3 straight seasons, Detroit eliminated Chicago from the playoffs. Each exit was a gut punch, leaving Jordan battered and frustrated. The man orchestrating it all was Isiah, a player Jordan could never bring himself to respect. Beyond the court, tensions grew even sharper. Rumors circulated that Isiah had spoken harshly about Jordan behind closed doors. The tension was visible in their interactions: cold stares, clipped handshakes, and, eventually, outright disdain. The rivalry reached its breaking point in 1991, when the Bulls finally overpowered Detroit in the Eastern Conference Finals. With seconds remaining in Game 4, the Pistons walked off the court without shaking hands, led by Isiah. To Jordan, it was the ultimate insult, a gesture that confirmed every ounce of bad blood between them. Even years later, the bitterness never fully dissolved. When the Dream Team was assembled for the 1992 Olympics, Isiah's exclusion sparked controversy, with many pointing to Jordan's influence. While Jordan never publicly admitted to blocking Isiah, the shadow of their rivalry made it hard to believe otherwise. For MichaelJordan, Isiah Thomas wasn't just a rival, he was the face of humiliation, the reminder of years when the Pistons bullied the Bulls and mocked his pain. And even after Chicago rose to dominance, the sting of those battles lingered. It was a rivalry forged in scars, and one Jordan could never quite forgive. If Isiah Thomas was the brain of the Detroit Pistons, then Bill Laimbeer was the muscle. Standing tall, with a scowl that seemed carved into his face, Laimbeer became the very embodiment of the bad boys era, a player who embraced being hated, and who relished every opportunity to make life miserable for MichaelJordan. While Thomas orchestrated the schemes, it was often Laimbeer who carried them out. The Jordan rules were not just a defensive plan, they were a declaration of war, and Laimbeer enforced them with elbows, shoves, and bone-jarring fouls. Every time Jordan attacked the basket, he knew Laimbeer would be waiting. It wasn't basketball as artistry, it was basketball as combat. For Jordan, who believed in skill and willpower, facing Laimbeer felt like a violation of the spirit of the game. The tension between them burned hottest during the playoff clashes of the late 1980s. In 1988, 1989, and 1990, the Pistons eliminated the Bulls, each series more physical than the last. Laimbeer became Jordan's personal tormentor, knocking him to the floor, smirking at the whistles, and daring the young star to fight back. For Bulls fans, it was agony to see their hero constantly battered. For Jordan, it was fuel for the fire that would define his transformation into a champion. Laimbeer's unapologetic style made him impossible to respect. He didn't hide behind excuses, he declared openly that intimidation was his weapon, and if opponents hated him, he welcomed it. That attitude was salt in Jordan's wounds. Every bruise became a reminder that the Pistons, led by Laimbeer's defiance, stood between him and greatness. When Chicago finally broke through in 1991, sweeping Detroit in the Eastern Conference Finals, Jordan's relief was immense. But even victory couldn't erase years of bitterness. The sight of Laimbeer walking off the court without offering a handshake burned into his memory. It wasn't just about basketball anymore. It was about dignity, and in Jordan's eyes, Laimbeer had none. Decades later, when asked about rivals he disliked most, Jordan never hesitated to mention Bill Laimbeer. Respect was reserved for those who battled within the spirit of competition. Laimbeer, in Jordan's mind, had crossed a line that could never be forgiven. For MichaelJordan, Bill Laimbeer was more than a rival, he was the personification of pain, frustration, and defiance. And while those battles forged the toughness that fueled Jordan's rise, the scars they left ensured that Laimbeer would forever remain in the gallery of rivals Jordan could never forget, and never forgive. Karl Malone, the mailman, delivered punishment as reliably as he delivered points. With his chiseled frame and relentless style, Malone became one of the toughest matchups of MichaelJordan's career. Their rivalry didn't come in the form of constant playoff clashes during Jordan's early years, but at the very peak of his dominance, when the Utah Jazz stood between him and basketball immortality. The stage was the NBA Finals of 1997 and 1998. Jordan's Bulls were chasing a second three-peat, but Malone and John Stockton had built a Jazz team that refused to bow to Chicago's dynasty. Malone, who had just claimed the MVP award in 1997, was determined to prove he belonged in the conversation with Jordan as the league's best player. For Jordan, that was a challenge he could not let stand. In the '97 finals, every possession felt like a collision between two titans. Malone scored with his signature power moves, backing down defenders and finishing with force. Yet Jordan seemed to take every one of those baskets personally. The series reached its defining moment in Game 5, when Jordan, weakened by illness, delivered the legendary flu game, scoring over 30 points to steal victory on Utah's floor. To Jordan, beating Malone under those conditions was not just survival, it was domination, a way of reclaiming the MVP trophy he felt had been taken from him. A year later, the Jazz returned for a rematch, hungrier than ever. Malone continued to punish Chicago inside, but Jordan responded with one of the most iconic finishes in sports history. In Game 6 of the 1998 Finals, with time winding down, Jordan stripped the ball from Malone in the post, dribbled up court, and hit the famous jumper over Brian Russell to seal his sixth championship. The play that ended the Bulls' dynasty began with Malone's turnover, a mistake that symbolized how Jordan always found a way to rise above his rivals. For MichaelJordan, Karl Malone was not just another opponent. He was the powerhouse who threatened his crown, the MVP who dared to stand in his spotlight. And though Jordan respected Malone's talent, he could never quite forgive the challenge, the notion that anyone else might be considered the best. In defeating Malone twice on the game's grandest stage, Jordan settled the debate forever, but the battles left a bitterness that time could never fully erase. In the early 1990s, the NBA was searching for the next great star to challenge MichaelJordan's throne. Many believed they had found him in Clyde Drexler. With his smooth drives, soaring dunks, and effortless athleticism, the Glide carried the Portland Trail Blazers to the top of the Western Conference. By 1992, comparisons between Drexler and Jordan were everywhere. Some even wondered if Drexler might be the league's most complete guard. For Jordan, those whispers were intolerable. The rivalry came to a head in the 1992 NBA Finals. Jordan's Bulls, fresh off their first championship, faced Drexler's Blazers. The media built the series as a duel of equals, Jordan versus Drexler, the crown on the line. But to Jordan, there was no equality. He saw the comparisons as an insult, a dismissal of everything he had fought to achieve. And when the games began, he made sure the world understood the difference. In Game 1, Jordan unleashed one of the most iconic performances of his career, burying 6 three-pointers in the first half alone. After the last shot splashed through the net, he turned toward the broadcast table and shrugged, as if to say, "Is this what you wanted?" It was the famous shrug game, a moment that not only humiliated Drexler but also silenced the idea that anyone could stand shoulder to shoulder with Jordan. The Bulls won the series in 6 games, and Drexler's chance to dethrone Jordan vanished. While Clyde would later find redemption with the Houston Rockets, that finals defeat forever defined their rivalry. For Jordan, it wasn't enough to beat Drexler, he had to crush the very notion that another guard could share his spotlight. Years later, Jordan admitted he used the comparisons to fuel his fire. Respect existed, he acknowledged Drexler's skill, but forgiveness never did. The mere suggestion that Drexler was his equal had left a scar, one Jordan could not erase. For MichaelJordan, Clyde Drexler symbolized the threat of being overshadowed. And in destroying that threat on basketball's biggest stage, he not only secured his second championship but also ensured that his legacy would stand alone, untouchable. When the legend of MichaelJordan is told, it is often framed in the glow of championships, MVP awards, and iconic moments frozen in time. Yet behind the triumphs, there lies another layer of his story, the bitterness of rivalries that shaped his drive. Jordan did not simply rise above the NBA, he rose through battles that left scars he never quite forgave. Larry Bird was the first to humble him, reminding a young star that greatness required more than dazzling highlights. Isiah Thomas was the friend-turned-adversary whose Pistons crafted rules designed to break him. Bill Laimbeer became the enforcer, delivering bruises that fueled Jordan's evolution into a tougher, more relentless competitor. Karl Malone, armed with strength and an MVP trophy, forced Jordan to defend his crown on the final stage. And Clyde Drexler, once called his equal, became the rival Jordan had to dismantle to prove there was only one king of the game. Each of these men tested Jordan in different ways. They provoked his anger, sharpened his focus, and pushed him to levels few athletes have ever reached. Without them, his 6 championships and global aura might not carry the same weight. With them, the story of Michael Jordan becomes not only about triumph but about vengeance, memory, and the grudges that fueled his fire. Even in retirement, when asked about those years, Jordan's words reveal that the wounds never fully healed. And perhaps that is the truth of his greatness, that it was forged not only in victory but in the grudges he refused to release. So now the question passes to you: of all the rivals who scarred Michael Jordan's journey, which one do you believe left the deepest mark?